beyond recovery. Live your best life, free from addiction. Join alcohol-free host Matt Gardner and his weekly guests to talk about their hero's journey from the darkness of addiction into the light of recovery. Living beyond recovery is to rediscover who you truly are. Let's start the show. Yes, let's start the show. My guest today is Ryan Sprague. He is also a podcaster. He's got 2 podcasts on the go, Highly Optimized, as well as One Time on Psychedelics. And he's also the co-owner of Highly Optimized. My guest today, Ryan. How's it going, Ryan?
Dude, Matt, I am so excited to be here with you, man. You know, it's funny with your intro. I mean, that is the exact journey I've gone through with cannabis and what I now certify people to go out there and do, right? Is, you know, and I'm sure we'll get into this, but I'll come right off the cuff with it. You know, cannabis is one of those plants that's extremely popular, yet very misunderstood. So dependent on the plant, but I have my specific views on, you know, why I think that happens, and I'm sure we can dive into them. So, man, the intro was great. I feel 100% in alignment to be here, and I'm excited to dive in with you, man.
Rad. I love that, Ryan. Thank you so much. You know, I'm glad you hit that right off the bat like that, you know, and like, so yeah, we'll definitely circle back to that. But before we do, I'd love to get to know more about you. You know, this is literally our first conversation. We're in the same coaching community and such. I've been watching you from afar. I really enjoy, you know, not blowing smoke, pun intended. You know, I really enjoy following you on Instagram. You got some great content, and you know, so I was excited. I would say it was a good couple months that I was like, I got to reach out to this guy, and he kept showing up, and so finally I did. But let's learn a little bit more about Ryan. Like, what is your story? What's your background? You know, like just everything a little bit. You know, but fill in the blanks for us.
Yeah, so I am a seeker by trade. You know, I've always been so curious and fascinated with things like the mind, the soul, the spirit, you know, et cetera. And so when I was 16, I started experiencing a generalized anxiety disorder. And after trying every pharmaceutical under the sun with no positive effects, I found cannabis. And cannabis was the first thing that allowed me to feel, quote unquote, better. And so, like many people, I asked them for feeling comfort from living in discomfort. And so I ended up believing that in order to get more of this comfort, I would need to interact with more and more of this medicine. And so that really begins my journey into cannabis dependency. Now, at the end of the day, I was interacting with cannabis rather than a pharmaceutical, which I do believe is fantastic. But at the same time, you know, I wasn't really catching the biggest lesson that I think plant medicines have to offer us, which is that all they're showing us is what is already possible in our lives past the limitations, the unconscious stories, and the things telling us that we can't, couldn't, shouldn't, wouldn't, et cetera, be able to live that higher quality life. And so when I got into that, you know, there's more that I want to do with this cannabis plant. You know, I was just fascinated by it. And, you know, what happened was when I was 19, I went through my mortality crisis where I woke up one day and started peeing blood, had no idea why. And at that point, I was pretty unhealthy, you know, like most teenagers. You know, I was just like, you know, drinking Mountain Dew and just had no awareness that my choices actually mattered in life, right? I had been brought up on the model of healthcare, which is actually sick care, which is, well, everything's fine until it's not. And then you go to the doctor and, you know, they give you a pill or something and you're good, you know? So I had learned what I now call sick care instead of preventative medicine, which is true healthcare. And I went to the you doing drugs? I just have to ask. And I said, no, but I am interacting with a lot of cannabis. And, you know, at that point, you know, I saw him have a sigh of relief. And so my dad was someone who, you know, it wasn't anything that he, you know, vehemently was against, but he was always just kind of like, you know, Nancy Reagan, just say no. And so I decided, I was like, you know what, like, I'm going to tell him about this. And to my, you know, to his credit, he had no cognitive dissonance. You know, he was like, well, I mean, you're sitting here in the hospital, you're showing me these, you know, videos you've been watching on new science coming out with cannabis. I know what it's done for you with, you know, anxiety. So who am I to tell you you can't interact with it, right? Adult. So after that point, you know, I was able to consume at home. I was still living at home with my parents at that point, and I didn't have to hide it anymore. And I think for a lot of people, their cannabis story is ripe with shame and guilt surrounding the fact that they had to hide this for so long, and that it was this dirty thing they did, and all of these types of things I see with my clients. So after that, you know, I really started asking myself, like, is psychology all I want to do? Because I started getting put into the box of university, started realizing like there's something missing here. So one year I went to, this is now like my second year of college. I ended up going to the Boston Freedom Rally one year, which was a big, it is rather big, out with cannabis, and the cops are there, but they don't bother you. It was a much bigger deal before it was legal. You know, it's legal here now in Massachusetts. So now it's kind of like a celebratory party rather than a legalized party. But so I go there, and I ended up meeting this guy, Mike Fitzgerald, who I found him because he was yelling, "Who wants to make butter with me?" So I was like, that's a cool, enticing offer. So I went over to his tent, and he was passing out these pamphlets for a basic 8-week semester opening up at an institute they had just opened called the New England Grassroots Institute. So I ended up being like, oh my God, this is cannabis training. Like, I thought I'd have to go to the West Coast for this. Medical had yet to pass, so I didn't know if there'd be an industry, but I just knew I was getting a hell yes from this, from my heart. And so I go, hey, could you help me with tuition? It was like $500, but here I am, a broke college student. And he goes, yeah, you know, I'll do one better. I'll go with you. I'm fascinated by this stuff. So we end up going there together. You know, right when this happened, we bought a grow kit too, because now we're going into like when medical just got legalized. So I got my medical card. I was able to buy a kit, and we started cultivating, and our first harvest sucked. I mean, it was just terrible. It was very apparent that I did not know what the hell I was doing. So I find the school, I get in there, I start learning all about the science, the pharmacological aspects of cannabis, the, you know, how to cultivate it, organic regenerative agriculture, Korean natural farming, all these things, right? And I start just getting obsessed. And so I end up in that, really starting this path where I was like, okay, I want to be in the cannabis industry. Medical got legalized now. There's going to be an industry out here. Didn't know what it was going to look like. So, you know, in 2014, I went to a music festival out in Las Vegas, and I did MDMA for the first time. And when I was out there, I had this very interesting feeling surrounding my father. I didn't know what it was, but I figured, well, my dad likes casinos. He likes steakhouses. I'm out here across the country, you know, for the first time. And, you know, I'm doing a lot of the things that me and him do together. I just chalked it up. It's like, oh, I just miss my dad. Well, when I came home, I had a really interesting thing happen, because I can't say correlation equal causation, but 14 days after I got home, told me that he was with terminal cancer, and that he wasn't going to take treatment, that it had already metastasized all throughout his body. And my dad had just finished up bringing his brother for 3 years to Dana-Farber in Boston for cancer treatment. So imagine the mindset of someone who had just watched someone close to them get broken down by chemo and radiation, and now they're being presented with the same situation, you know? And so my father, I had an opportunity in that moment, you know, and the opportunity was either one or the other, which was I can either try to, because at this point I had picked up holistic health. I was big into exercise, eating right, all the things that, because again, when I was peeing blood, which was a benign cyst on my kidney, I always forget what that was. Order, right? So I ended up getting all the stuff. So I start telling myself I can either try making my dad into the version of him that I think he should be, so I can selfishly maybe continue having him around, right? Or I can decide to love him for who he was or who he is, and the person that's raised me, the person that's loved me, and I can decide to love him for that. And so I chose the latter, thank goodness. And my father was a 3-day, you know, 3-pack-a-day smoker, you know, drank Coca-Cola, did the things that, again, he was my dad, right? So I chose to love him for those things. And after a couple of weeks of him not taking treatment, he started to experience some pain. So at this point, he was still not interacting with Ken at all. He was fascinated by it too. So I started asking him, like, Dad, would you be interested in trying some RSO? And RSO stands for Rick Simpson oil. Rick Simpson is the gentleman that brought this type of, you know, extract to the world. People can look up, you know, on PubMed, studies of THC killing cancer cells, CBD inhibiting their growth, right? So this is pretty apparent in our public knowledge now. But we had met a lot of people at the school that were healing their own cancer with the help of cannabis. And so they were also getting their diets in order and doing all this other stuff. But it was fascinating. Dana-Farber was puzzled, right? This is back in 2014 or 2013 at that point. So they weren't seeing a lot of this. Now it's much more available, right? The knowledge there. So I decided, you know what, at least can help him with his pain. And so we turned our last harvest that we ever cultivated together into RSO, and I started administering it to him. And so at this point, you know, I had already had my journey of moving through anxiety with cannabis and becoming self-aware and realizing that cannabis helped me connect more to myself. And I thought that was amazing. But it wasn't until this that I really discovered the true power cannabis had. And I realized that it wasn't just a given. It wasn't just something that people interact with cannabis and they get this effect, but that it was possible. And so what that was when I was sitting with my dad and giving him this RSO, you know, I would feel a barrier come down between the two of us. Now we were very close. I never got to hear it before. there were, aspects of, his life that I had never heard about before. I got to watch him have closure with his grandchildren, with his other children, with me, and most importantly, his own mortality. We got to laugh about the concept of death, and, we got to totally transform and translate what that was, right? It was just, instead of a closing and an ending, it was actually just the beginning of another infinite story, right? And so we got to have these incredible experiences. My father, who got diagnosed and was, given 2 months to live, ended up lasting a full year past his termination date. And through that time, I got time that I don't know if I ever would have had with my father weren't for cannabis. And so through that time, I really realized the ability of cannabis to be a connection medicine and tool for self-awareness, if what at that point I didn't know, and that I would describe now, if it was used intentionally and connected with ceremonially, because that's what I was doing with my father, right? I was making sure he was comfortable. I was making sure the setting was good. I was making sure his mindset was good. I was asking him questions. And then we were connecting with this medicine together in a ceremony. And so after he passed, that really just lit the passion within me. And I was like, I want to get into the industry. So I spent 5 years in the professional industry, working with over 5,000 medical patients on every type of range of disorder, from cancer all the way down to Crohn's, all the way over to anxiety, depression, paranoia, etc. Training, and also all of my holistic health training into there. And so after about 5 years in the industry, we got taken over by a corporation, and I decided that, that wasn't in alignment for me. I wasn't only in this industry to make money and do the things that these people were doing. I was in it to help people, and that was not their value system, which was fantastic. What a blessing in disguise, because it was because of them triggering me so hard that I ended up going to MJ BizCon, having an illuminatory experience, again with MDMA, where I realized, oh shit, I haven't felt feelings in a long time. And then what I realized was that the same thing that had helped me connect was also something that I was using to numb out my feelings unconsciously. And so back from that, I took from the first month, I played the victim and said, cannabis did this to me, and, this must be how the plant works. And then immediately after that, I realized, oh, this is actually a me thing. I took accountability for it. And then I took that 3-month break. And after that, I came back to cannabis with a totally different pattern, which was now, before, what I would do is I would interact with cannabis every night, but especially Monday through Friday when I was most prone to stress. And I would use it to numb out and tune out, right? And just forget about my day. And now what I did was I would only interact with cannabis, and I still do this to this day, on weekends. If there's a reason for it, I don't interact with it every weekend. But if I find something through Monday through Friday in my sober period of life where something challenges me, it triggers me, and I don't know what it is, I keep track of all that in my journal. And then that following weekend, I actually sit with the plan and I make my intention to go directly into those things that challenge me, into those things that triggered me. So now I'm taking a pattern of me tuning with cannabis, bigger new pattern, tuning in with it. So I discovered this for myself, found much better results with it. And then it was over the next 3 years of, trial and erroring this with people, right? Hosting ceremonies for people. It was funny. I was getting into all these coaching circles, and Lifted being one of them. And I was asking them about coaching, and they were always much more interested in asking me about cannabis and how I was cultivating, and could I host a ceremony with it? And so I was like, sure. So I started doing it, and people kept asking for it. And then finally it was in 2021, after, meeting with Paul Chek and meeting with people like Aubrey Marcus, where I realized, oh shit, there's really something here. And some very high level people that I look up to are very curious about what I did in my own life to balance this. And so that's really what started the Connect Cannabis program. We've had 10 groups go through it now. We're certifying them as cannabis educators to go out there and help people break dependency, illuminate cannabis as a tool for self-awareness, and create a healthy relationship with the plant. Because at the end of the day, there's a lot of people out there, I just made a post about this today, saying cannabis makes you lazy, it makes you anxious, it makes you paranoid. It doesn't make you anything, right? You make you who, how, and what you are. And to the degree that you're externalizing that is the degree you're playing the victim, and you're not going to get ahead whatsoever if you're playing the victim. Now, if people want to play the victim, cool. I have no interest in talking to you, right? Like, if people are interested in actually going, okay, there's something here, that's who I'm talking to. So I'm never here to be right or wrong with cannabis. I'm never here to judge them on it. But if you are listening to this and you're saying, you know what, I kind of feel attacked by this, right? That's a good sign that you have an opportunity. Your opportunity is you could take the blue pill and go back to life as it was, or you could take the red pill and open up a whole new world for yourself. So that's a little bit of my journey, man, and how I'm here with you today.
Dude, amazing. That origin story, like, it's strong enough, just the the path that you took personally, but then the whole aspect of having your dad and sharing that experience with them. it really comes across as this is truly what you're meant to do. This is truly your calling. And then coming, even taking it one step further, coming, and you know, I want to say, really sorry to hear about your dad, you know, and then for you to come out on the other side of that and have this experience where it almost turns on you, the medicine or the way that you viewed it, it turned on you a little bit and you had to redefine your relationship with it. And then that's what's really launched you into what you're doing today. So very cool story. Thank you for sharing all of that. It's exciting stuff, man. There's so much that you touched on there. One of the main things that I'd love to just delve into right now is when you were talking about, you know, like cannabis as like amplifying what's already inside of you. So when you flip the script, so to speak, you weren't using it as a numbing agent anymore. You were sitting with your feelings. And then when you would go to use cannabis, you would have that intention of going inside and doing that deep investigation and such. What was that like as a transition to get into that? Was there a bit of experimentation, or did it become very clear? And then from the first time that you did that, you're like, boom, this is it. This is where we're going with this.
Yeah, great question. So, you know, there was some trial and error in the beginning, but what it looked like was after that 3-month break, I set that structure for myself. Something intuitively said, okay, if my pattern is to numb out with regards to stress, then anytime that I'm prone to real stress, which is the weekdays for me, because at that point, I forgot to mention too, in that 3 months, I left the job that I didn't like. I started highly optimized. I started podcasting, stuff that fucking terrified me. But what happened was, now that I wasn't numbing it out, I realized real quickly that the fear of staying the same far outweighed the fear of change. And so I just fucking changed, right? Like, you know, and so that was like what I was holding myself up with and using cannabis as my excuse, right? Like, you know, I never want to blame the plant here because the plant has nothing to do with it, right? Like, you know, again, if it was, then every single person objectively would have been addicted to the plant and would have been tuning out with it, and that would have been the thing, right?
Sure.
But I know, based on working with over 5,000 people in the medical industry and 1,000 people, both myself, that's just not the case, right? Some people never become dependent on it, some do. So for me, when I got into it, I created that structure for myself. And then I would go, okay, I knew plenty about plant medicine at that point. So I just started applying a lot of the rules I knew for psilocybin or ayahuasca or 5-MeO-DMT onto cannabis. And I realized, why is this medicine any different? Why is it looked at any differently than these other medicines, right? And if anything, this medicine is the one that's most accessible, right? Like, let's face it, psychedelics could help save the world. They could, right? They can. It's not that they will, they could. But there's not a lot of people that can afford $5,000 to go down to the jungle, take a week off of their lives, leave their families, right? There's also not a lot of people that might even be able to take 6 hours off and go through a deep psilocybin experience. But there are many people that could partake, right? Minimum effective dose to get some type of psychoactive intoxicating experience that could spend an hour, maybe while they're even cleaning the dishes, and gain some awareness. So then if they know how to do it, can actually be put into their day-to-day life, so that they're not just going from ceremony to ceremony and interacting with medicines, having these grandiose experiences, and then falling back into the same patterns that they were in before they went to the experience, and then believing they need another ceremony the next weekend to get that feeling again, right? Like, there's a way that, because cannabis, like, you know, a lot of these experiences, the farther out you go, the more you're going to have to integrate. And so with ayahuasca, with 5-MeO-DMT, even with psilocybin, which are fantastic in terms of like being able to open these doors, but there's a lot more time that it takes to integrate, right? And it's also going to take some time to even make sense out of what the hell you just experienced, right? Whereas with cannabis, it's giving you a microdose of the grandiose experience, right? So even if you're not necessarily microdosing the plant, you have a microdose of the grandiose experience, which I believe is remembering that we are divine beings, we are God, whatever way you want to put it. But it's giving you a microdose of that that's applicable and practical for your life at that moment. So maybe, I'll give you an example of this. Maybe you start realizing that, you know, for instance, this happened to me one time. I was running around, you know, with laundry to fold and a house to clean. And I was like, and I got this feeling that, you know what, like, it was on a weekend, and I was like, you know what, I bet cannabis could help me with this. And so I made an intention. I'm like, cannabis, you know, I'm getting this feeling that there's something you could help me with regards to like my mundane aspects of my day, right? Like laundry folding, things like that. Please show me, help me, and teach me what I have to learn today, right? And so I connect with the plant. I do a semi-directional prayer beforehand, sage and Palo Santo, my preferred methods of doing this. You don't need to if you don't want to. So I do that. And all of a sudden I go back to folding my laundry. Now, first thing I did was I put on music, right? That just happened. I just put music on, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. And I was like, oh yeah, I can enjoy the process of folding laundry. Then what happened next, realizing like why I was even folding laundry that day. And I realized I'm like, well, I'm doing it today because I have 4 packed days ahead of this, right? This was on a Sunday. So I realized I'm like Monday through Thursday this week are crazy for me. So that was the reason at first. Like my reason before I connected with cannabis was just I have to because the rest of the week's busy.
Mhm.
But then when I connected with the plant, it allowed me to see, well, yeah, that's one way to look at it. I could totally give that as my reason, but is that really empowering me or making me more excited to fold laundry? No. So what if there's another reason? So then I realized as well, if I wake up on Monday and know that my laundry's folded, my house is clean, and I can just get right to my morning routine and not have to worry about any of the stuff I didn't get done on the weekend, well, now this is an act of self-love. So now I'm able to
Wow.
translate and flip the script on why I do laundry, why I clean the house, why I take the trash out into an act of self-love. And now every time I, in my sober state, am doing those things, I remind myself, I am doing this because it's an act of love. And that's my particular reason, right? So like that's an example of how I had this experience with cannabis. It was so close to where I was at already that I was able to grab it, integrate it, and just put it right into my life. I didn't have to take time off my life to go learn that. Now, again, we teach integration in the program that I host and everything like that. But again, this stuff is a lot simpler, I found, with cannabis than other medicines. Now, of course, you can have grandiose experiences with cannabis too. We are going heavy in, and that's going to take longer to integrate. But I think cannabis is the most easily applied and practical medicine for most people in the world right now. Yet again, most people are not looking at it like this. But I know, working at the dispensary, everyone is interacting with this medicine. Young, old, police officers, firefighters, librarians, lawyers, teachers. I mean, you name it, that archetype is interacting with cannabis versus mushrooms, ayahuasca. Yes, there are archetypes, but it's not as big yet. Right. And so, like with cannabis, if we can take this plant that already so many people are interacting with and finding something they like with it, and we can allow them to become more educated on it, become more educated on where they might be, numbing out and tuning out with it, and then educate them on how to tune in with it and have a higher quality of life. Well, now we've taken something that hasn't allowed them to actually have to go take time out of their life and make their lives harder, go make more money, etc. Now we've been able to create an easier way for them to connect with this plant and get higher quality results from it, and therefore have a higher quality experience of life. That's my whole mission, is just helping people have a higher quality experience of life and working with them where they're at, instead of saying, oh, to do that, you need to go to the jungle and spend $6,000 and do all this stuff. If I can teach them a skill set that allows them to be their own guru, well, now they have a lot more to play with. And now when they actually get stuck, they have either a plant they can go to with a process they can go through, or they're able to work with a coach at that point, have much better questions for their coach, and be able to get farther ahead.
Man, that's beautiful. I love that whole thing. The examples, it's passing on information when you use a story. Like when I'm picturing you doing the folding the laundry and the music and all that, I'm going to remember that now, right? Like you just have, so I love you incorporated the story there. Super cool. There's a few things that came up for me, Ryan, and I'll just start rattling them off. And I imagine they're going to be a pretty good conversation topics. So you mentioned like the community aspect of cannabis, and also the benefit of doing it solo, as the story that you just gave, folding laundry and such. Yeah. What would you recommend to somebody that's sort of experimenting with that? Like, where does the community side of things come in versus, just doing it by yourself? How does that show up for you? And how does that show up for some of your clients that you work with?
Yeah, that's a great question, man. So what I would say is the first step is, self-awareness, right? Like, again, it's like there's no bad really setting. I might say a mindset. Yeah, technically there might be a bad mindset, but what I would say is that like nothing is inherently objectively bad. It just depends on, is it practical for your situation? So for instance, right, like if you're someone who right now is going through some challenges with, a relationship, or maybe challenges with, finding your purpose in life, or any of these things that are kind of bigger questions, you're probably not going to want to interact with cannabis in a group setting at a concert, right? Now, again, like that might actually work out okay. But in most cases, generally people are going to want to be laying down with a blindfold on, going through an experience, maybe with some binaural beats on, et cetera, right? So what I would say is, what is your why for wanting to connect with the plant? And what is the practical setting? And what is the practical dose for that? Because practical dosing is a big part of this too. Like if you're looking for an answer to a question, you probably don't want to eat a 300 milligram edible to get that answer, right? Because it's not really practical. Now, if you're just genuinely curious, right, and you discerned that cannabis is correct in your life, you've discerned that you're ready for a larger dose, you have the right setting, maybe you have a sitter there, and you just want to go explore, that might be a reason why you want to do a heavier dose edible. Now,
Mm.
say a friend's coming to town that you haven't seen for a while, and you're like, I really want to connect with this, individual. Maybe I want to go do something with them. Well, hey, maybe then you interact with some cannabis together and you go to a concert, right? Like, and you connect, right? Or you go to dinner or you go out for a walk or something, right? So again, it's like, that's how I would say, like, whatever you're craving most in life, break it into these two categories, right? Is this like, am I craving more connection to me or more connection to others, right? And a
Yeah.
good place to start this, if you want to go a deeper level, is, I mean, this might be a little crazy to get into, but do I feel like my relationship with my mother or my father is more challenged? Because your relationship to your mother is your relationship to yourself. Your relationship to your father is, parenting your relationship to others. And so that's like a deeper way to look at it. But for most people, it's just like, do I feel like I'm yearning for more connection to myself? Like, do I have a hard time being alone, or do I have a hard time connecting with others? And what is the practical dose and setting to allow cannabis to work as a tool for self-awareness in that area? But the first part is that if you actually want to have a relationship where you can tune in with the plant, you first have to let go of the relationship where you were with it. So, a lot of people, they ask me like, well, I've been a daily user for 10 years. Can I immediately switch to, still connecting with it every day and tuning in with it? And I go, yes, and right. There's a yes, and. So like,
Yep.
yes, you can definitely start using intention, using ceremony, and start integrating and get some sort of better result. But when your endocannabinoid system is clogged, right, and we can look at this from a scientific perspective, when it's clogged up from a lot of phytocannabinoids every single day, it's not going to be as conducive for allowing the plant to access transcendental and spiritual properties. And so, like, yes, you can. And I do recommend, like, if you're someone listening and you're like, I'm not ready for a break, at least start actually just setting your ceremony that your attention can plan. Start integrating thereafter, right? That will get you far ahead. And I have a conscious cannabis guide I can give you for the show notes too, that breaks that down a little bit more in detail. But ultimately, to experience the full power of cannabis, you need weekly breaks. Like this is talked about in shamanic culture too. It's not like a right or wrong thing. It's just like physiologically, if you want your endocannabinoid system to work with phytocannabinoids, it can't be clogged, So that's what I would say overall. Yeah.
Well, and I'd circle back to, you had that intentional 3-month break that you did, and that was then you were able to come back in with structure and a clear mindset and intention, right? Which is actually a great segue into what I wanted to get into. Now, is this the whole idea of intention, leading into something like this? And I think that's the differentiation between, using cannabis as what be like maybe a party drug, or, how I used it, to be honest with you, when it went through my teenage years and my 20s, big time, right? Whereas nowadays, for sure, if like I'm out camping, I'm going to pick a time where I'm just like, I'm feeling really, okay, this is going to enhance this, and I have an intention behind this. I want to connect with nature. It's a beautiful sunny day. I want to write some music, So, and that has really made a massive change in the way that I experience it. So yeah, I want to just talk a little bit about the power of intention, right? And I'm liking how there is some parallels or some comparisons or overlap essentially with the idea of, if you're going to be doing some of these other heavy hitter plant medicines, the 5-MeO, ayahuasca, treating it of that same thing, right? Going in with a question, with an open heart and a question in your heart of, okay, or an investigation, some curiosity, right? I love that whole, term.
Yes.
So yeah, just a little bit about it. I not necessarily a question, but definitely I like the topic of intention. So let's talk about it a little bit.
Yeah. So first of all, like what I'll say is, how I look at cannabis. I mean, how you do anything is how you do everything, right? So the same way that Mr. Miyagi taught Daniel's son to do karate by wax on, wax off, right?
Yeah.
A lot how to connect through connecting with cannabis. And it's like intention is a perfect example of this, because for me, I know that when I first learned about intention and they were like, put intention on your food, put intention on your water, right? I'm like sitting there and I'm like, I don't feel anything. Like, is this doing anything? This is stupid, right? So I think for a lot of people, especially men, right, we have this special sauce of being super left brain. I think for a lot of us, like we kind of like, we imagine it's important, but like we can't feel it, so we can't really connect it. So what I like to, talk about is how, for me, when I was able to make intentions with cannabis and then I was able to feel a result from that, then I realized, oh my goodness, this is always happening, because once again, cannabis plant are only showing you right, eliminating blue pattern, different side of the brain, etc. Right. So what I realized was if I can interact with the cannabis plant and see my intentions come out, well, now I know why I'm putting an intention on food. And even if I can't feel it when I'm in my left brain, I know it's doing something, right? So intention for me is really just like, I mean, if you want to talk about it from a deep esoteric level, it's reminding ourselves over and over that we are the creators of our own reality and that we are God in human form. Right. And God, for a lot of people, is a charged term. You can think universe, quantum, source, you can change it out. But, I'm an initiate of the Modern Mystery School. And so I do a lot of lineage work with regards to remembering my divine nature as a God. And intention is one of the ways in which we command life to work in accordance with us. Right. So, for instance, like I'm going to feel quenched and amazing after I finish this bottle of water. Right. And then you finish the bottle of water and you notice, right, you get quicker to notice, oh my God, I do feel quenched and I do feel like more flexible and like more energized. Right. And then you eat that food, and before you eat it, you go, this food is going to nourish me. Right. Now think about this, right? Even like Bruce Lipton and people like that have talked about the power of belief. And so with people that are on here right now, like, well, what if I want to interact with alcohol every once in a great while? What if I want to interact with cannabis every once in a while? What if I want to interact with a cupcake every once in a while, right? Well, at the end of the day, if you intentionally discern that that's correct for you, right, and you're not lying to yourself, but you're telling yourself the truth, and then let's say with the cupcake, for instance, maybe you're like, the gluten, oh my God, the sugar. Well, what's worse, right? Eating the muffin and believing the whole time, oh my God, this is going to be terrible for me. I'm going to feel like shit tomorrow. Or choosing to believe and putting an intention on it that right now, this muffin, even though it's got gluten or whatever, is going to be nourishing to my soul. And I believe that. And so you then cast that spell for yourself and you go into it. And guess what? When I do that, now again, this is just subjective evidence here, but when I do that, that muffin does not mess me up. Right. And so very similar, like that's what intention is really reminding us. So we could look at intention as like, yes, you're putting an intention on something, but I like to look at like why we're creating intention. The why behind it is to keep reminding ourselves over and over through synchronicity after we set these intentions that we are creating our reality. Because the more we can remind ourselves of that on a daily basis, the more we're going to be able to actually start controlling our lives and feel in control of our lives. And so that's what I really feel intention does and why I'm so big with it with plant medicine, because you're entering different states of consciousness where you can actually feel energy more. You can feel these things that are talked about. And so you have the opportunity to see the actual effect of these kind of out there concepts for a lot of people, like intention or, awareness or, spirituality. You have the ability to experience these things firsthand and then actually revert that into your life and be able to directly apply it to every single thing you do in your life.
Yeah, man, great answer. Great answer. I love that. I'm going to go into like another I word. So we did intention. Talk about integration. It's like, and it's a big thing. And you mentioned it's like the farther you go, like for example, you gave the example of ayahuasca. It's going to be a massive trip. I've always found I'm interested to see what you think about this. There's a delayed reaction between understanding. It's like your body understands you. I experientially had this like understanding in my body when I did 5-MeO DMT. And there's like this delayed reaction where my brain, I thought I was going to journal for pages that night and I had nothing. Like the tap was, I'm like, okay. And then I realized, in weeks afterwards, okay, it was starting to come to me. There's this delayed reaction between what my perceived understanding of what just happened was. So integration though, when you're talking with cannabis, what does that look like as far as, I mean, you gave a great example on your end, but yeah, just integration in general, again, just another topic of conversation that I'd love to get into.
Yeah. First thing I want to bring awareness to is what you just mentioned, like, Kabbalah calls this the evolving triangle, right? So the way this looks, I'm going to try to draw it out, right? Yeah. So you gain knowledge, right? You have to empty your cup, right? So you're like, okay, I want to learn about something, right? I'm going to go do a plant medicine, right? So you start gaining knowledge around it, right? So then you have the experience, right? So now you're in the knowledge phase. Then through experience, right? You go out and start experiencing things like you were saying. It takes a couple of weeks to go experience, make sense of things, whatever. Now you come to an understanding from knowledge to across to the other side of the triangle is now understanding. Then with that understanding, it's through service that you come up to wisdom, right? So now you've gained wisdom. And then from there, you must empty your cup again. So maybe you realize, oh my God, this thing with cannabis is great. Oh my God, I figured it out. I'm going out and teaching other people it. But now there's something else like, oh my God, I noticed this other thing happening with cannabis, right? So now you must empty your cup again and go down to be able to access knowledge, right? Then through experience, you gain understanding and then wisdom. And so it just keeps going like this all the way around. And so that is one of the ways in which integration works on like a more esoteric level. But to break this down into practical doses for people, what I look at is this, right? So once again, Kabbalah looks at the four worlds: the spirit realm, the air realm, the water realm, and the earth realm, right? Which could be related to, fire. Spirit, and then like mental plane, emotional plane, and physical plane, right? So what I look at is, I give people this exercise. I go, okay, when you come out of a cannabis experience, right? Ask yourself these four questions. What did cannabis do for me physically in this experience? What did it do for me emotionally? What did it do for me mentally? And what did it do for me spiritually? Right. And there's no right or wrong answer to this. It's just your best educated guess at that moment in time. And then from there, you start asking yourself, like, okay, maybe physically it relieved me, right? It made me feel relaxed, right? It made me like tension leave my body, right? So right there, you could go, okay, well, if I don't want to become addicted to cannabis, right, and keep using this plant to access that feeling of like relaxed muscles or whatever that is, what could I do in my day-to-day life that could start allowing me? Because I realized, oh my God, I like when my muscles don't feel tight all the time. So how could I actually start applying something in my physical world to start actually allowing my body to feel better? So now from there, maybe you try, exercise, maybe you try, yoga, something like that, right? Then emotionally, maybe mood per day, right? Well, maybe I could do some mindfulness exercises. Maybe I could meditate, right? What did it do for me mentally? Man, it really slowed my mind down. What could I do for that throughout the day? Maybe box breathing, right? Maybe something like that. What did it do for me spiritually? Maybe me feel more connected. What could I do for that? Well, I've been kind of feeling isolated recently, especially after the pandemic. Maybe I can start hanging out with more friends, right? So a lot of what integration looks like is you're taking an awareness you gained, right? And I break it down into the four worlds because still like one awareness is kind of hard to put a button on. So I break it down into the four worlds. And then I'm like, okay, those four awarenesses you gained, right? How can you start applying like the best part of that awareness to your day-to-day life without the plant included, right? So this is like why a lot of people become dependent on plants, right? Or anything, right? Is because they find this feeling of comfort that they like because they're living in discomfort, and they wrongly assume that they have to externalize that to be able to provide that comfort because they don't know how to give it to themselves. So if you can look into these four worlds, which all of your challenges come down to physical, emotional, mental, or spiritual issues, right? If you can look into those four worlds and build something into your day-to-day life, morning ritual, nighttime ritual, mindfulness exercise, whatever that is, that, four of them at least, right? That one does each one of those realms. Well, now you're following a breadcrumb trail. Maybe you realize I actually don't like weight training. All I want to do yoga, right? So again, it's not like, you're going to find the answer out of that, but it's following a breadcrumb trail. I gained this awareness that I liked the way my body felt, my emotions felt, my mental world felt, my connection to my spirit felt, right? Now you're going to make educated guesses on, and if you're doing it yourself, right? This is what we help with in the program, but you're going to make educated guesses based on, okay, what's in the physical realm? More sleep, better diet, movement, all of these things, right? So you're just making educated guesses and moving the dial. And then maybe in the next ceremony, you realize, wow, actually, yeah, like I picked up a better diet, I've been moving, but my body still feels a little off. Maybe I'm going to go see a chiropractor, right? Like, you start actually just asking questions to the plant, like, why does my body think? So the times this is unlike psilocybin or some of these other things, you can actually have your notebook handy and say if that idea pops through to you, right? Of like, oh my God, my muscles feel great. I really want to remember this. You just go over to your notebook and write it down. Like, you're not incapacitated. And so you can keep track of things. You could even sign up for a yoga class while you're still in the ceremony if you want to take quick action to integrate it, right? But again, like integration for a lot of people gets super complicated.
Yeah.
Because they're looking into like scanning their body, remembering the first time it happened, all of these things that can be great. But, human nature works this way. They don't want to go through something that's going to make their life harder. So if you talk about integration, you're like, it's this ridiculous process we bring people through. It's going to be a 3-month integration process. Like all of a sudden they're like, wait, I got to go do all this. I'm just going to keep smoking cannabis the way I was. Right. But if you start allowing them to see, like all you need to do is ask yourself 4 questions when you come out of each experience, make an educated guess, and then apply them the next week. And then from that, you actually start spending less money on cannabis. You have a higher quality experience of life and you're happier overall. Right. Like, and now you're starting to join different communities where maybe you start weight training, you meet some friends. Oh my God, now I can connect more. Like you make someone's life easier by telling them that, like, you can integrate, now they're listening, right? Because that's how human nature works, right? Like at the end of the day, you know, I think a lot of the movements that are out there are going to fail because they don't have a great, you know, message, like the environmental movement, but because they're wrongly assuming that humans are willing to make their lives harder for people they've never met in order to, you know, save a problem that's not going to really play out in their lifetime, potentially, right? And so, like, for instance, the example I always give here is that, you know, when cars came out, it wasn't like anyone was going around saying horse and buggies are terrible, you know, down with horses, you know, these kind of things. It's just cars came out and they went, wait, you mean I can get from point A to point B quicker? And I don't have to have a horse? Oh, that's easier. I'm going to do that, right? So naturally, cars took hold, right? And so with integration, I'm always looking at, like, with any of these things, so I'm like, you know, how can I talk about them in a way where it's easy? People don't need to, like, take a whole gigantic course on learning every specific component. It's just like your intention is just like, hey, do you want to be happier after you interact with cannabis? It can be as simple as that. Just say that little sentence before you interact with the plant, and then notice what happens as a result, what it brings up in you, right? Now for ceremony, hey, it's just what's practical for the intention you have, right? If you're looking to go within, make sure you're somewhere alone. If you're looking to connect with friends, make sure you're with friends, right? And then for integration, it just becomes, okay, what did you notice physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually? And then how can you make an educated guess on, on what you could do to integrate those things, and then try it out. And that's what we offer support with in our communities, right? Like, even if you don't sign up for our course, we still want to be able to help you. And so if you're someone who's trying this out, you listen to this exercise and you try it and you're like, oh, I got some things, but I have some questions, hop over to the Ceremony Circle. That's our free group where, you know, we're there to help you guys with anything you need help with, you know? And so when it comes down to it, you know, we like to make things simple. And so that 4-step process of integration is the simplest we could possibly make it, where you don't need to understand necessarily inner child healing or any of these things that are super important and amazing. But again, if someone's listening to this, like, and I tell them all of that, they're just going to be like, that sounds like a lot of stuff that I have to learn first, right?
100%.
People the way and will trust right away, you know? So, yeah.
I love it, man. Yeah, I just boiling it down to it's similar theme to, like we mentioned, the minimum effective dose, you know, with the cannabis, also the minimum effective dose for being able to integrate, right? Just keeping things nice and pared down. And, you know, the theme I've been meaning to ask you about this as we go on, and this is as good a time as any. Speaking of pared down, like we talk about being in the Enlifted community, I imagine the Enlifted community was just so hand in hand. Like when you found this, like it just feels so perfectly matched with the work that you're doing. And anybody that's not exactly sure what we're talking about as far as the Enlifted method, the lifted community, it's all about, it's like a lot of like words matter, like and choosing your words very carefully. If you have a long affirmation, really boiling it down to like 2, 3, 4 words tops, so you can really remember it and have this mantra effect. So yeah, what was it like finding Enlifted, and then how easy was it to integrate with what you're doing with cannabis?
Yeah, you know, that's an amazing question, because Enlifted has played one of the biggest roles I've ever had played in my life, where the only reason I got into coaching was Mark. So what happened was, when I had that big awareness, right, I started the podcast. I was about 2 months into my break from cannabis, and I started pouring my heart out on Facebook. I have Instagram. So I was just picking a subject, prosperity, success, whatever was coming through to me, and I was just pouring it all out in, like, you know, run-on sentence format on Facebook. And so in one of them, I talked about language and how it creates our reality, because I had heard Mark 3 years prior on a Positive Head podcast with Rachel while I was walking around this 5,000 square foot cultivation facility I was working at. And so her and I listened to the episode. We were like, that guy sounds awesome. Completely forgot about it, right? And so I start talking about language, and someone asks, oh my goodness, that's really cool what you talked about language. Do you have any references for that so I could look more into it? So I'm like, what was that guy's name? So I look him up and I'm like, yeah, this guy Mark England. I tag him. Hour later, I get a voice note from him. Now, if anyone messages me these days, I only voice note, right? At this point, it was super intimidating. I was like, oh my God, is this guy voice noting me? So Mark is like, hey, I really like what you're talking about. We should hop on a call. So I hop on a call with him. And at this point, I'm obviously really curious to leave my job very soon. All this stuff is happening. And he starts telling me, he's like, you ever thought about being a coach? Now, I really didn't know what the hell he was talking about at first. I was like, do you mean like a soccer coach? Like, I was like, I didn't really get it. But I started asking questions, and he started like, wait a minute, this is actually everything I wanted from psychology back in the day without the red tape around it. And so I was like, yeah, this sounds really interesting. So at that point, I had my bills paid and everything like that, but I had about 3 grand in savings, and the course was around 2,700. And so it was a big thing for me. It wasn't the first time by any means I invested in myself, but I'd only done one other program before that, which was Check's HLC1. And so, I was like, well, let me think on it. I called Rachel because at that point I still needed some validation. And I was like, I really want to do this. She's like, what does your heart say? I'm like, it says yes. She's like, then why the hell are you even calling me? I'm like, understood, right? Like, gamer, recognized game.
Yeah.
So I called Mark and I'm like, yeah, dude, man. I ended up signing up a program, and a month into it, the pandemic hits, right? So now I ended up being able to leave my job. They shut down. I ended up being able to collect some money, like in the meantime, where I was looking. And so everything just worked out. So now I have all this time. My bills are paid. I'm not making the same amount of money, but I don't have to worry about having a roof over my head and food in the fridge. So I'm like, okay, I have all this time now. I have no distractions. I used to go to a lot of shows, festivals, which I still love. But again, like, there's a lot of things in my life I was distracting myself from. And I wasn't just distracting myself with cannabis. That was just the main way, but it wasn't the only way. And so now all of my distractions are done, right? I can't even get a haircut, for God's sakes, right? Not that I've got a while, but I have to get my sides trimmed and things like that. So like, I have nothing that I could do except just think about what I wanted to do with this business that I just kind of started right before the pandemic hit. Now I'm in coaching. So Mark ends up inviting me down to his lake house in August of that year. This was in like January, started the course. And so typical Mark fashion, he calls me and he goes, hey man, a bunch of guys coming down to the lake house. I'm not taking no for an answer. Let me know when your flight's coming in. I'll pick you up. I'm like, okay, cool. So I go down there. I meet him. I have a blast, right? Like we had been talking a lot. He came on my podcast before that. And so I meet all these people, Chris Marhefka, Ben Joy Walker, Danny Rios, all these guys that were just Zoom screens to me at that point. I go down there and Chris is like, hey, I'm hosting a retreat in 2 weeks. You should come in Colorado. I'm like, all right. So this started a 2-year stint of me just saying yes to everything. And it was through that journey that I started hosting cannabis ceremonies, just having people reflect me what they saw of me. Like Danny Rios, the first time we met, he was like, bro, you're a medicine man. Like, it doesn't matter if you're white. Like, he's Mexican. He's like, don't worry about if you're white out there doing this. Like, you are literally a medicine man. You need to start doing this stuff. Is one of the first people that told me that. And then we went to Mexico for 6 weeks directly after the Colorado retreat, where just all these synchronicities started happening. And then when I was in a lifted level 2, right after the lake house, I wake up one day to a message from Mark in the group. There was like 45 people on our level 2. A lot of people I looked up to at that point, Mike Salemi, Chris, all these people. I wake up to a message of Mark saying, hey, if any of you guys want to graduate in lifted level 2, you have to go on the Highly Optimized podcast. Mark has done so many in terms of like being able to help me with all this stuff. And he's been like one of my right-hand mentors through all of it. And I will preach the Enlifted method and their certification until I am blue in the face, because it has been not only the most magical thing I have done for myself besides creating Connect with Cannabis and what I do now, but also they're like some of my closest friends. I just spent a month with them down at the lake house in Virginia. I go down and hang with them all the time. Like, they're some of my ride or die friends. I travel around the country with them. We all support each other. I've helped Mark get connections. He helped me get so many connections. Like, it's such a great community. They've done amazing stuff. And I will literally like I said, like, Unlifted, go do it. It is the best thing ever. And we've applied a lot of the language stuff into Connect with Cannabis. And so it's been so amazing getting to watch them grow, growing with them, getting to trade connections and all this stuff and podcasts. And it's been the best, man. It's so much fun.
Yeah, amazing, dude. Thanks for sharing all that too. Yeah, Enlifted is truly, I can't say enough. Negation acknowledged. I can't say enough good stuff about it. And Mark as well, badass guy for sure.
He's such a gangster, dude.
Totally,
he's such
man.
a gangster.
So it's such a good. Yeah, I just a quick note before we'll wrap things up. We'll bring it in for a landing here. I really enjoyed having you on. By the way, we'll have to do a part 2. I had so in Lifted level 2. Mark is such a strong presenter. And that was literally the way that he wrapped up that graduation call. I remember just sitting staring at my computer for about 5 minutes afterwards. And I'm like, I'm quitting my job tomorrow. I didn't quite. It was like within 2 weeks, I had to get some stuff together, but I had the letter of resignation in my pocket. I kept listening to the song that he had played at the end of the grad call to and from work, just to like remind myself of that feeling. And that's what led me on the current journey that I'm on. So Mark is completely badass. So just wanted to share that with you as well. Dude, thank you so much for coming on. It's been great getting some FaceTime with you, Ryan. And just where can people reach out to you? Where are you most frequently located online?
So Instagram is the best place to find me. My personal account I'm on all the time. That's at The Real Ryan Sprague. Funny story, there's another Ryan Sprague out there who's a host of Mysteries Decoded and a regular on Ancient Aliens. Now, if you guys know about me, I get super into that stuff. We didn't dive into that at all. But like I said, initiated the Modern Mystery School. So when I figured that out, I was like, what a synchronicity, right?
No
But anyway,
kidding.
you can find me at The Real Ryan Sprague. Sorry to the other Ryan Sprague, who I'm actually going to have on my show soon.
Yes.
Yeah, he's definitely real as well. But at The Real Ryan Sprague is my personal account. Guys, voice note me, message me. I love talking. I love connecting. Any questions. There's a business account at highly.optimized where we're constantly releasing the new podcasts and things like that. There are the two podcasts, Highly Optimized podcast and the This One Time on Psychedelics podcast. We also have the Ceremony Circle, which is our free group. You can hop in there, start asking questions. I'm live every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern in there. We have recordings of everything. I have the free Conscious Cannabis guide people can hop into. And if you're looking to buy the full ticket ride, we have the Connect with Cannabis program, which is a 12-week certification program to certify you as a cannabis educator, to go out there and help people break dependency, allow it to be a tool for self-awareness in their lives, and create a healthy relationship with it. And we have our newest creation dropping on December 1st, which is Grow with Cannabis, which is now a 7-week on how to cultivate the world's highest quality medicine based on my 12 years of cultivation experience. You're going to be learning about organic regenerative agriculture, Korean natural farming, applying biogeometry to your garden, weekly energy practices to make sure you're showing up with an energy that's conducive to growing high quality medicine. Because that's, I mean, we could get into this a lot, but you know, the energy of the grower really matters, right? The same way that like if you're interacting with meat that was farmed in a very factory farmed way, that meat is stressed out. You then eat that meat, you then get stressed out. Cannabis and plants work the same way. It's just not being looked at by other people, by many people other than Joe Patitucci, who's actually hooking plants up to electrodes and allowing them their songs to be heard, right? So when people with a negative energy walk in, you can hear their songs change. So we're talking about a lot of that stuff. And so that's a 17-week self-guided course. It's dropping December 1st. And literally, guys, if you're sick of paying, you know, insane amount of money for crappy quality cannabis, standing in long lines, driving, you know, to far away distances just to realize your medicine is sold out, and you want to help other people learn how to grow their own medicine, and you want to learn how to grow your own food in the current system we're in, which is really important, Grow with Cannabis is amazing. We currently have a package deal going too if people want to buy the ticket into everything. And I think that's about it. So a lot of different ways to connect. And man, this has been amazing, Matt. I'm so stoked we got to do this, man, and definitely down for round 2.
Absolutely. Ryan, thank you so much. Yeah, for sure. We'll plan round 2 sooner than later. You betcha. Thanks so much, dude.
Yeah. Thanks.